Hello again, and welcome to a very untraditional video when it comes to my usual content. So, Lethal Company. Lethal Company graced the world with its presence on October 23rd, 2023, and to say it was an instant smash hit is an understatement. It was more like an orbital strike. This game decimated the market with its immense popularity. You couldn't escape it. I made videos on it, your aunt made videos on it, her 6-year-old son made videos on it, and we all watched videos on it. Its success was so unprompted and so sudden that it washed away every other release for the next 2 months, devouring the entire media sphere for its entire relevancy online, and then it more or less vanished. Today, we're going to talk about Lethal Company. What made it such a massive hit, and what its release did to the gaming ecosystem as a whole. So, starting off, what is Lethal Company and why is it so popular? Lethal Company, if you somehow aren't aware, is a 4-player cooperative horror comedy game where you and your buddies play as a group of employees working for a company that just so happens to be lethal, who wants you to explore old rundown facilities, avoiding monsters and collecting scrap metal to feed to your monstrous employer. The comedy comes from the inherent silliness of the models alongside the existence of proximity chat, which, as we all know, is God's gift to content creators everywhere. Now, as to why it's popular, I think it's a trifecta, that same trifecta that decides whether all games are going to get popular. There are 3 categories: marketability, accessibility, and quality. Marketability decides how easy it is for your game to spread on social media. Accessibility decides how easy it is to pick up and to play your game. And quality defines just how damn good the game is. There are many games that only succeed in one of these categories, but almost all games that take over the internet have all of these categories in spades. Think Undertale, Among Us, Getting Over It, and FNAF. All of these games have marketable characters, are easy to make entertaining content out of, can be played on the most potato-ass brick you can imagine, and are generally considered good-ass video games. Lethal Company is another one of these games. It's so natural to make content of. We all know it's the most clippable game in existence. Everyone who plays this game has 1 or 2 clips of them or their friends that they still have saved in a Discord chat or on their hard drive. That, plus the innate fun of watching a content creator and their friends either get scared, die, or clutch some crazy win out of their asses, is perfect content. You could not escape this game for months after its release. Making content for this game is so easy you have no idea. I would know. Not to mention how easy it is to recognize from a distance. Once you see that orange jumpsuit, you think Lethal Company. It's a time-honored truth that people in monocolored spacesuits tend to be a good design for maximizing marketability. No wonder they have a Fortnite collab. It also just so happens to have a good monster, as well as a good cute mascot, all alongside the aforementioned good protagonist design. The Bracken in particular serves as a crazy simple design that is both scary and memorable enough to stick in people's brains, sometimes for the wrong reasons. The hoarding bugs, on the other hand, serve a good niche as an early game monster that is scary to some people and absolutely adorable to others. I'm in the latter category. These guys are merchandisable enough that I have a few 3D printed hoarding bugs in my room that were gifted to me a while back. God knows the money a hoarding bug plush would make. Lethal is also a very accessible game. Unless you're playing on a 12-year-old Chromebook, you'll be able to play the game on at least the lowest settings. It's also cheap, only running you a very affordable $10. And finally, filling out the quality bit, the game's just really fucking good. It's just a really good video game. This combination made Lethal Company explode as everyone's friends got them to buy the game because they found it on YouTube, leading to more people having the game, leading to more people buying the game, leading to a constant ramp-up that exploded into the game having a peak player count of over 240,000 people and selling over 100 million copies, meaning it is entirely possible that Zeekers, the independent creator, made over $700 million from this one game, taking into account what Steam takes from game sales, and that's ignoring the Fortnite collabs and potential future merchandising. That is an absolutely insane amount of money to make from a game like this. The only comparison is Five Nights at Freddy's and Undertale, which are also indie games that absolutely exploded in popularity. Each of their devs are now a massive influence in the indie game sphere, with Scott Cawthon turning his fame into a multimedia empire. I'm just saying, we can absolutely expect more Lethal Company, or at least to hear from Zeekers for a lot longer. Lethal's explosion has been absolutely unprecedented, but as with all things that get insanely popular, eventually they reach their limit and begin to fall off, so let's analyze how Lethal Company died. Okay, sorry, that was a bit of a bait. It's not dead. It's not even been a year and it's still keeping up with big games like Rocket League. The game is still getting semi-frequent content updates that add a lot, like the most recent one added a new creature and a new interior layout. It's not dead. It's doing quite well for a game that was a trend, at least compared to how Among Us was doing in this time frame. Now, that's not a great comparison because Among Us entirely relied on its appeal to play with friends and has little to no single-player enjoyability, whereas Lethal has a fun gameplay loop outside the social aspect as well as a good modding sphere. But still, point made. Lethal is still going strong, and Zeekers is still releasing quality updates for it. It's just not as popular or watchable as it once was. I know I hyped up the game dying, but it's genuinely doing fine. Go play more Lethal Company. Go check out the update. The game's getting more fun with every new thing added. The most recent update added my son to the game. I love him so much. Go and have fun with my son. Okay. That was a shorter section than I thought, so what now? Well, we've talked about the Lethal Company part of the title. Now let's talk about the other half, the consequences. What has Lethal Company done to the gaming ecosystem? Well, admittedly, at first it wasn't much. It took a while for the impact on the gaming sphere to actually show up, but I believe we're starting to see it. A trend is clearly beginning of Lethal Company likes coming out on Steam. Now that might seem a little bit presumptuous. Let me describe these games for you. Maybe they're not that similar to Lethal Company. They are 4-player co-op horror comedy games where your goal is to do a job in a spooky area full of monsters and get out before a time limit expires with a stylized graphical style. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess this category would be better called Phasmophobia likes, but that's not important. I'm making a point here. One game should have immediately appeared in your head when I said that. Content warning, or Murky Divers, I suppose, but I haven't played that yet, so I'm not going to be talking about it. Now, I may have started it out a little bit abrasive, but content warning is actually the main reason why I don't want to shit on these games, and why I'm willing to accept them as a genre, because content warning is just fucking fire. This game rocks. The game has you as a group of YouTubers, or spooktubers I suppose, making videos and recording spooky things. Your quota is an ever-increasing view count that you need to match. This time, the facilities that you enter are actually just an array of set maps in the old world, which is this really cool grayscale pencil-y area with even the monsters being horrifying mutants that share the style. It's a really interesting aesthetic and it lets the game stand out. My biggest issue with the game is with the recording system. Compared to Lethal Company's Scrap, where you know the worth of what you're picking up when you pick it up, content warning keeps you guessing, and unless you know the view modifiers of each and every monster and spooky thing, you're more or less just fumbling desperately looking for things that would give you views and hoping you get them. So I guess it is just like being a YouTuber after all. Though the recording system does give you the benefit of being able to see the videos that you make at the end, which allows for more clippability and more fun in the group. The game in general is just a lot sillier than Lethal, but its monster designs are surprisingly a little bit better in my opinion. The monsters in this game are benefited immensely by the limited, pencil-y grayscale aesthetic of the old world, some favorites of mine being the spooky arms guy and the Titan. Though the entire game is animated using ragdolls. This lets things interact much more with the world, but it also does make the game look a lot sillier, but also a little bit lower effort on the animation front. The monsters all have incredible basic designs, but when animated they all look a little bit too silly to be scary, at least compared to the Lethal Company's Bracken and Coilhead, who still managed to get me to jump a little bit. The basic inspiration taken here seems to be mostly in the premise, but the actual nitty-gritty of the gameplay loop feels very different. In content warning, you're oftentimes not afraid at all. You're actively seeking out the monsters to record them, and often finding a lot of comedy in those moments. The only times where you're really scared are when you find something that's objectively too strong for you, and usually doesn't last long as you get your ass whooped immediately. Compared to this, Lethal more has the comedy be equal to the horror, if not a little bit less than the horror. The monsters are goofy, but only once you get to know what their deal is and how to deal with them. Even a monster like the hoarding bugs can be scary before you know that they're mostly harmless. Lethal is generally darker, scarier, and much more deadly. Content warning, on the other hand, is easier to see in and harder to die in. The areas are much more open, and there are only a few monsters I can say genuinely scare me. The best example of this being the Titan. This guy's a fucking primal fear. Big dude. The monsters are also more obviously silly, and the entire environment is much more gamey and innately funny. The game's sense of humor is much more pronounced, whereas most of the funny moments in Lethal Company are, honestly, mostly accidental. I feel like I've made my point in the analysis department. Content warning is an evolution on the ideas Lethal presents, taking on a different niche of a much funnier, much more casual experience that is easier to pick up for people who don't find genuine horror to be all that fun. It's gotten popular, and it seems to be getting updated often too. I hope it keeps getting better. Good work, content warning devs. So, conclusion time. This was a fairly short video, but I mostly just wanted to discuss how Lethal Company exploded so much, and specifically how its ideas have been translated into the gaming ecosystem. It's only been a year, and we already have 2 fairly big popular games that are hardcore inspired by Lethal Company, so there's a very solid chance that we'll get a lot more. Probably a few asset flips too, though we honestly probably have at least 30 of those. I haven't really looked. This is hardly as popular as FNAF or Among Us was, so I can't imagine it'll be a trend that beats itself to death like FNAF clones or Among Us clones did. Though we are still getting FNAF and Among Us inspired media, and honestly, it's not all bad. A solid portion of it's actually totally fire. Lethal is really interesting because of how popular it got for the position it was in. It's a silly game that I honestly expected to have a very niche appeal when I first bought it. Part of why I made that first concepts video was because I thought the game was niche enough that my opinions would get considered, and hey, they might have gotten through. Probably not, but I can dream, okay? Give me this dub! Seeing the game explode into what it is now has been an honestly surreal experience, and I can't imagine what it feels like for Zeekers to experience that level of explosive growth in such a short time. Going from making niche indie horror games to a Fortnite collab in less than a year has got to be a wild ride. Oh well, I'm overstaying my welcome at this point. I hope you all enjoyed this short little analysis of how a game I love became the biggest indie hit of this and last year, though Dredge and Pizza Tower are good runner-ups. Anyways, that's all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.